when they reevaluated it, they discovered, to their great embarrassment, that they hadn't given the monkeys MDMA. They'd given them crystal meth, which is
Oh my God.
which is 10 times more potent. Ecstasy rots your brain was the front page of the magazine, the science magazine Science. And the retraction was, well, just a little note inside. It's dishonest science. Some of the worst science has ever been done.
Blows me away. Every time I talk to you, you blow me away. Professor David Nutt, welcome back. In front of us, we have 5 tiers and we have 10 drugs. And I thought it would be fun and educational and entertaining to list each of these drugs based on their harms.
Go on then. Let's try it.
Let's see how it goes. Okay, so number 4 to start. Okay, so LSD. LSD is number 4. An interesting place to start, as the person I'm speaking to is, if I'm right, the first person to ever scan a brain on LSD. That's correct?
I think that is correct. Yes, absolutely, yes. And so, okay, well, I'm going to put LSD into D as LSD the least harmful category. Yes.
Very interesting. Okay, let's talk around that. Yeah, it will appear there, so you have them all there. And if you want to change your mind later on because you're like, oh, actually, heroin probably a bit more hard. Like you can switch it around. So don't feel like you're locked into place on any of these. But
Good.
Let's talk about this. What are the harms of LSD? Why did you place it in D, the least harmful category?
Well, because it rarely kills anyone. It doesn't cause addiction or dependence. And it's been around for a long time, so we know it's unlikely to suddenly turn into a much more harmful drug than we thought. So its history and modern use tells us it's relatively harm-free. It certainly, even when used recreationally, and certainly when used in a medical setting.
Talk about the addiction aspect. I think this is a really interesting aspect of psychedelics. What makes a drug addictive, and why are psychedelics not considered addictive? And this is an important point.
Well, what makes a drug addictive is that people tend to use it and then lose control over the use of it. There are different reasons for that. There are some drugs like cocaine and to some extent alcohol where the biology of the drug drives the brain processes of wanting more. So use becomes kind of repetitive and compulsive. And that's generally thought to be due to the release of dopamine. And dopamine is a kind of more-ish transmitter. It gets you up, you're great, you feel great, but when it comes down, you feel rubbish, so you take more. LSD works on the serotonin system, and serotonin is generally anti-addictive. It calms people, it relaxes them, but importantly also it reduces impulsivity, and so people are more restrained in their behavior. So serotonergic drugs are generally anti-addictive, and with LSD we see that's really good evidence for that, because it was used back in the 60s. A single LSD trip was used in 6 separate studies of people with alcohol problems, and it produced an effect which was very enduring, and certainly it's more effective in those early studies than any treatment we have for alcohol dependence today. So LSD is anti-addictive. And there's another very interesting angle as to why that is, because if you take more of it, you get tolerance. Now, you get tolerance with a lot of addictive drugs. You get tolerance with alcohol, you get tolerance with ketamine, you get tolerance with heroin. But you can overcome that tolerance by taking more of it. So for some drugs, tolerance drives use. But with LSD, you can't overcome it. So if in the unlikely event of someone wanting to keep taking it, which is generally not the case, even if you did try to take it regularly, you wouldn't get an effect. The effect would wear off very fast.
Yes. Very cool. It's a really good breakdown. Personally, I think a drug's addictive nature is a very big sign for me how legal it should be recreationally and what the policies should be around it. And when a drug doesn't have that reinforcing addiction issue, which psychedelics don't, I'm generally tending much more favorably towards recreationally legal, is my own personal policy, because I think you can get into difficult areas when you have free agency being taken away with the addiction in some of the more severe drugs that we'll talk about. And I think in those cases, you can make a case for maybe the government has to protect people because, you know, your own free will and own agency is being taken away in some senses in addiction. But again, when a drug really is anti-addictive, like you take LSD, and generally you don't want to do it for a few months. You're like, that was entertaining, that was fun, I felt at one with the universe for a while, but I'm good for a few months.
Mm.
For me, that it's pretty healthy. That promotes reasonably healthy habits. Of course, there are you know, some cases where people have bad trips and that can have negative psychological properties on that, but in general, that's kind of my stance on recreational use. Would you agree with that? Do you think LSD should be recreationally legal?
I certainly think it's if you keeping some of the other drugs like alcohol and tobacco legal, then yes, I think it should be. And I think the risks of things like bad trips or the risks of psychosis could be mitigated by a sensible system of access to, say, pharmacies with a smart card, with maybe even a doctor's certificate saying that the doctor had warned you of the risks and you didn't have any genetic or familial risks. So very much, I think so, because one thing is very interesting what's happening now in the States with magic mushrooms. In a number of American states have made mushrooms, which is like a weaker form of LSD available, and they're doing it for wellness. And I think the fact that that can happen tells you that in a population across a state like Oregon or Colorado tells you that actually psychedelics are likely to have more net benefit than
Yes.
any net drawbacks. So they are rather special in that sense, that most of the other drugs we're going to talk about will have relatively little net benefit compared with drawbacks, but LSD does.
Yes. Yeah. Well summarized. I love it. So I've been trying to drink less alcohol. And honestly, it's had a pretty big impact on my health. I'm sleeping better, I'm exercising more, and my business is growing. The data suggests that people are drinking less alcohol than ever, which overall I think is great, but I'm still looking for a little treat at the end of the workday or a hard workout. And that's where Sentia comes in. Sentia is a 0% alcohol drink that feels like you're drinking something special without any of the downsides. It's created by neuroscientists and it's designed to give you that relaxing buzz, the same kind of feeling you get from alcohol, but without the hangover, brain fog, or impact on sleep quality. And it tastes absolutely delicious. They already have a GABA red berry, which is perfect to mix with a tonic or orange, or GABA black, which is awesome with Coke. Personally, I've been really enjoying the GABA gold with Fanta lemon on ice.
That's actually genuinely delicious. Like, I'm not even play acting there. It's actually just really, really good.
So you might be wondering, how does a drink with 0% alcohol give you that buzz? It almost sounds too good to be true. Well, this is the really cool neuroscience part. The secret is GABA, the brain's natural calming agent. And the different GABA flavors have different cognitive effects. Sentia's founder, Dr. David Nutt, has published over 500 independent research papers and written 34 books on neuropharmacology. What Dr. Nutt realized was that we can harness the same calming, relaxing effects from alcohol without any of the side effects. I genuinely think this could be the future of drinking. And they're also just releasing their first beer and stout, which as an Irishman I am dying to compare to Guinness. Sentia are offering my viewers 10% off their first purchase, and I genuinely could not recommend it more. I think even if you're looking to just substitute your one gin and tonic on a Tuesday with Sentia, the cumulative health benefits over time will actually be very noticeable. So check out Sentia, again, 10% off at checkout. Okay, next 5, we have MDMA. So what do we think about MDMA? First off, what is MDMA? What does MDMA do in the brain?
So MDMA is the abbreviation of the chemical term for what is known colloquially as ecstasy. So MDMA is a sort of hybrid. It's sort of half a psychedelic, half an amphetamine, and it's a very interesting drug because when it was first, it was rediscovered by a man called Shulgin, who had tested all sorts of different amphetamines, and he said this one is actually rather different. This one gives you a more calm, more deep perspective on life. And he shared it with his wife, who was a psychotherapist. And she said, this is a bit different from those amphetamines you were giving me. I'm not G'd up. I'm actually feeling more in tune with you. I'm feeling more empathetic. And she encouraged the use of this for couples counseling to help couples fall back in love, essentially get back together after being driven apart by, things like kids and mortgages and jobs. And it was called empathy. And in fact, it was being widely used and lots of people were benefiting, but it was legal. And it got sold as a legal alternative to the illegal amphetamine. And that then encouraged a lot of use, which was also pretty harmless. Kids having fun, dancing a lot. But there were a few deaths from too much, basically dehydration and high body temperature. But the big problem was the name got changed, and then it was changed from empathy to ecstasy, and that was just a red rag to the political establishment. We're not having kids having ecstasy when we can't, so it had to be banned because it was seen as socially disruptive. So it's a sad story because the therapeutic value of MDMA hasn't since been rediscovered. It's a powerful treatment for people with trauma disorders, but it's still illegal.
And talk about MDMA and its harm for the brain. Is it neurotoxic? If you take, say, moderate to low usage for a number of years, would you expect to see anything coming up in the brain? Any neurotoxic damage? Any memory difficulties? Is there anything like that there has good research behind?
Well, here's one of the true horrors of how the desire to make a drug illegal or to justify making a drug illegal has led to some of the worst, maybe the worst science of drug harms there's ever been. I mean, it was so the decision to ban MDMA was made in the US, it was made in Britain, and then of course it was made internationally because essentially the UN was controlled by the USA. But you couldn't ban a drug just because kids were having fun. So you had to find an excuse. And the excuse was, well, some kids were getting too hot and they were dying from heat stroke effectively. But that was easy to deal with. All you do is have chill out rooms and you have free water. The early deaths from MDMA were all related to the fact that the clubs in which it was being used were exploiting the kids and basically trying to make them buy water. Sometimes they turn off the taps, they turn off the toilets to stop people having access to cold water. So we could have dealt with the problems. We could have dealt with those problems. And I think they knew that. So they had to come up with other problems. And they had to come up with, well, it's going to rot your brain. It's going to damage your brain. And sure, if you give vast amounts to rodents or monkeys, yeah, you can damage the brain. But the study on which, the ban really was celebrated was a study which was outrageous. It was a study which actually claimed that a night of ecstasy plus listening to heavy rock music would damage the brain of a monkey in the same way as someone who has Parkinson's disease. Now, that's kind of obviously wrong, because if that were the case, there would be a lot of kids coming out of clubs at 5 a.m, stiff and shaky, and they weren't. And
right.
It's an outrageous story because the group that published that has spent a lot of time looking for the harms of MDMA. They examined people, kids who've used it, adults who've used it. They were desperately trying to find some evidence of harm. They couldn't find it in the human, so they went to the monkey, and they found it in the monkey. Now, when that paper was published, a lot of us said, well, this cannot be true because otherwise we would see it in humans, because there's not a big difference between those parts of the brain in monkeys and humans. And so even though it got published against the recommendation of the referees, there was a campaign to have it reevaluated. And when they reevaluated it, they discovered, to their great embarrassment, that they hadn't given the monkeys MDMA. They'd given them crystal meth, which is
Oh my God.
which is 10 times more potent. Yes, and if you
I think I'd heard that story before. I think I remember that story. It's crazy.
and it's truly, and of course, the first the ecstasy rots your brain was the front page of the magazine, the science magazine Science, and the retraction was, well, just a little note inside. And it just shows that the desire that scientists had to please the politicians. I mean, there are many, many horrors that have come from abnormal drug policy. There are many, hundreds of thousands of people have died as a result of the war on drugs, as being victims of the war on drugs. But there's another victim, which is not rarely talked about, but which is science. And in America, it's probably the same was true in Britain, but we weren't spending so much money on research. You could not get research funding to study drugs like ecstasy or drugs like psychedelics unless the grant was guaranteed to find harms.
Absolutely insane. And
strangely, that's what scientists did. Oh, we found some harms. Give me some more money to find some more harms. It's dishonest science. Some of the worst science has ever been done.
Blows me away. Every time I talk to you, you blow me away. Like, if MDMA had even remotely the same effect as having Parkinson's, like I went to college in Dublin City. Like, I would say 50% of my college course would have Parkinson's by now. It's just clearly not the case. It's clearly completely divorced from any evidence.
Absolutely. But that doesn't mean it's completely free of harm. I mean, if you were to take MDMA, take 150 milligrams of MDMA every day for years, it might well mess with your serotonin system in your brain. But the evidence we have so far in humans is that there aren't very many people of your generation who use a lot of MDMA who seem to have problems. They're not filling up our clinics with chronic depression. And many of them, of course, look back on it and say this some of the best times they ever had. And bonding people together is actually something which is rather missing these days, isn't it? As a society, we get more atomized, more segregated. Now we're on our phones rather than looking others in the eye. So there was that period when ecstasy was widely used. I think many people look back and think, wow, it was maybe some of the best nights of my life. Yeah.
I honestly couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more with you, and I think a lot of my college friends would agree. Where do we from? I'm gauging from that with MDMA. What do you think? Is it going in the C? What do you think? Is it a D? Is it a C?
I think I'm going to have to put it a little bit higher than LSD.
Okay.
So put it in C. Yeah.
C. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, let's remember, it is a medicine now. It's coming back. It is in Australia. MDMA is a medicine. And that tells you it's, got to be pretty safe. Obviously, there are medicines like morphine, which are potentially harmful. But the fact it's being used in people with severe trauma disorders, then it's safe enough to be a medicine. Let's put it that way.
Yes. So these are all in sort of talk therapy dual approaches. Is that correct? So they would take a dose of MDMA and then they would aim to really talk about that emotional experience, and then the openness of experience that MDMA would give someone is really hoping that they would, crack some emotional doors down and try to understand the root of their problem. And very similar to psychedelic assisted therapy in that case. Is that right?
Yes, similar, very similar, but mechanistically, actually, interestingly different, and that's important. That's really important, because if you try one and it doesn't work, you can try the other. And therapists, now there are several countries which have access, particularly Switzerland. Now, Switzerland have, I think, about 150 psychiatrists with approvals to use both psychedelics, LSD and psilocybin, and also MDMA. and they are using them in that sort of fashion. If it's very much a trauma disorder, probably start with MDMA, because MDMA allows people to remember the trauma without being overwhelmed by the emotion. I mean, what is PTSD? Well, PTSD is a disorder in which someone's brain, and this is important as a distinction, their brain continues to believe and relive a trauma. That's how the classic example is: you've been blown up in Iraq, you've seen your buddies, have legs blown off or be killed, and every time a door slams or a car backfires, you think you're being blown up, and your brain reacts before you can say, no, it cannot be a bomb because I'm here in, London. No, your brain says, I'm being blown up, and you fall to the floor, and then you realize why you've done it. So it's these unconscious, deeply ingrained, deeply learnt responses destroy people's lives, because truly you're on edge all the time. You're worried about there's going to be a bomb, and even though there isn't, you can't stop it because your brain has learnt that response. And to unlearn it, you have to get back into the state you were in when you were blown up or assaulted or whatever. But that's very hard to sustain. It's hard, it's unpleasant, it's stressful. It's it's actually, people faint, or they run out of the room if you're trying to engage in therapy. MDMA dampens down a special circuit in the brain called the limbic system. It's part of the part of the brain which encodes emotion, and it encodes it so fast. It encodes it at a pre-conscious level. And MDMA dampens that emotional circuit, and that is what we did the first MDMA imaging as well, by the way, which was quite even more challenging in some ways than studying psychedelics, because MDMA was with the hatred, the stigmatization of MDMA was way worse than psychedelics, because it was a newer drug, and the government, everyone knew that kind of psychedelic. Magic mushrooms have been around for thousands. It's like everyone kind of knew they weren't that bad, but MDMA, well, the new super strong synthetic company. So MDMA dampens down the emotional circuit and allows people to get on top of those excessive brain reaction to emotions. Psychedelics, when they can be used in trauma, and that's a less well studied field than psychedelics in trauma. What they seem to do is they seem to help people get cognitive control over what they didn't have before, so that the emotions don't suddenly spring on you and overwhelm you. It's a different target, different parts of the brain, but together, it can be very powerful.
Really well explained. I can imagine a difficulty in MDMA brain scan studies is trying to keep them still. No, I can imagine that being a huge issue of trying to reduce movement when someone is on MDMA and in a brain scanner and they're not kind of beating to a music or bobbing their head or anything. Like, is that a genuine difficulty in trying to get them to sit still while the brain is being scanned?
Yeah, but we don't play the music.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And that's part of it. But isn't it interesting when you say that? There is this fascinating relationship between the chemistry and the beat. In fact, a lot of people can only listen to that rave music when they're on MDMA. And when it's not present, it doesn't kind of make sense. So somehow MDMA, they came together. You probably got a better idea than I have of which came first, but I don't know.
I can only agree with what you're saying rather than add any scientific point there. Experientially, I think that's absolutely the case. Let's go to the next number. That was really well said. I really liked that whole segment on psychedelic talk therapy and MDMA talk therapy. Really important, and I think incredibly exciting to see where that goes in the future. Next one is cocaine. This is the picture that I hope doesn't get us demonetized. But let's talk about cocaine.
Well, I think if you, well, since every third film I watch has got someone doing those lines, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So
hopefully you won't be turned off. So cocaine, I put up there, sort of bottom end of A.
Okay. Yeah.
So cocaine is a stimulant. I just want to again emphasize that there's a fundamental difference between the effects of MDMA and cocaine. They both give you energy, but cocaine does it through pushing out a lot of dopamine, a lot of noradrenaline in the brain and also in the periphery. MDMA pushes out some dopamine, some noradrenaline in the brain and periphery, but it puts out more serotonin. And this is really important. Serotonin protects the body from too much dopamine, too much. Serotonin is an anti-stress transmitter. And we've shown that. I mean, one of the first papers I read when I was starting being a researcher back in 1979 was a really interesting paper that showed boosting serotonin in the brain reduces cardiac events because it dampens down the activity of the cardiac nerve from the brain.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it does actually, and that's why people. One of my hobby horses is that people still talk about MDMA as if it's an amphetamine, but it's not. It's not like cocaine. It's not. It because of that has that predominance of a serotonin effect, whereas cocaine is clearly dopamine, clearly noradrenaline, and the dopamine is what gets you high, and it gives you that rush of pleasure and energy and that sense of being absolutely king of the world. But that effect is transient; it disappears over 30, 40 minutes. And any of those listeners who've been on a kind of weekend cocaine party know that you ramp it up and you've got to keep taking it to maintain. And it doesn't matter how eventually it'll start crashing. And even if you keep taking it, you won't ever retrieve that initial high. And by the end of the weekend, you will be knackered, you'll be exhausted, and you won't function then pretty effectively for a few days because you'll have depleted, particularly the dopamine system in your brain. So you've kind of exhausted your energy circuit in your brain. And okay, that's not so bad. I mean, generally, cocaine doesn't damage your brain. I mean, it can make you addictive because the dopamine system is the addiction circuit to some extent. But the big problem with cocaine is that it overstimulates the heart. And one of the things, you hear on a regular basis, senior sports people, particularly, American football players, American basketball players, who many of them are actually very, very fit, but cocaine changes the cardiac rhythm, and they, often they die when they're young through taking cocaine. There's another really important point I want to make here, which isn't discussed enough, which is that if you take cocaine and alcohol together, which of course many people do, this is famous. This joke going out in London, 10 years ago. If you there are some bars down the King's Road. If you ask for a rum and coke, you got a you didn't. It wasn't the black coke. You got the white coke. It was,
It's the same in Dublin. It's the same in Dublin. I think London and Dublin share a huge cocaine problem that we suffer from our own wealth and stupidity together.
Yeah, and the combination of alcohol, because alcohol is ethanol, and ethanol makes a chemical bond with cocaine, and it produces a substance called cocaethylene, and that's like a long-acting cocaine. So whereas cocaine might clear from the body in 30, 40 minutes, cocaethylene hangs around for quite a bit longer. So if you keep pushing it, taking cocaine, the levels go up, the cocaethylene levels go up, you're essentially putting more strain on your heart. And then and that's why cardiac deaths, cocaine deaths are rising. They've gone up by about 5-fold now in the last 10 years because cocaine's cheaper. We've got rid of all the safer alternatives like methadone, and so it's become very common as the alternative stimulant to smoking in many ways.
Yeah, cocaine is one that I'm definitely happy with its illegal status, although I'm sure I know there's going to be a lot of possibly black market stuff that comes up that's negative for that as well. I can't see a world where it would be, maybe you disagree on this, that it would be positive for cocaine to be legal, because I've seen, unfortunately, I've had friends, people I know really well, really smart people, high performing people,
Yeah.
just fall prey to this substance because of how addictive it is. And it's a cult. It's just such a common culture in Dublin, and some big companies, that they'll do it together with their employees and even their bosses. Like it's ingrained in the culture, and it's so bad, and you see how it destroys them. And I'm sure
Yep.
there's negative consequences of it being illegal as well, but hard to make a case for recreational legal cocaine, I would guess.
Difficult, but not impossible. I think it depends a little bit on where you live. So
Yes.
if you live in Mexico or Colombia, people are making the case, because a legal cocaine market could take away an enormous amount of problems, deaths from crime, which are, in those countries, are going to be many times greater than deaths from cocaine. And of course, in those countries, you've also got crack cocaine.
Yes.
So if you get a choice, cocaine is clearly less damaging than crack. So I don't know if crack's on that little list of yours. I can't see very clearly. But
It's not. This is the 10 most common illicit substances. Obviously, if it wasn't illicit, caffeine and stuff will be here. But no, crack cocaine isn't here. Give me. Let's give a quick. I don't think people really know what crack cocaine is. Just very quickly, what is crack cocaine and how does it differ to normal cocaine?
so the powder cocaine that you're showing there is cocaine hydrochloride. It's a salt. It means it's very soluble. You can, and I don't recommend this, but you can inject it. We do use it. It's used in some branches of medicine as a liquid because it's a very good local anesthetic. So there's some kinds of eye surgery. You put it on the eye, it numbs the eye, and then you can do a cut in the eye. So when I had my my lens, my cataracts removed, they would numb it with transient a bit of cocaine, and so you don't feel the needle go. The scalpel going. Anyway, let's move on to less unpleasant things. Crack cocaine is what we call freebase.
Yes.
So you've got rid of the hydrochloride, and that makes it more volatile, which means you can smoke it, and hence the crack pipe. So basically, you can heat crack cocaine to a level where it vaporizes without disintegrating. Now, smokable drugs are more addictive than snorted drugs because basically your lungs are a lot bigger than your nose, so you get a much faster uptake of the crack, and so you get higher levels, and that means you get more addictive. And also, it turns out now that around the world, crack is much cheaper than powder, so it's become a serious problem actually in the UK now. So we, as you probably know, we do a lot of research on heroin addiction. The vast majority of people who use heroin, certainly in the main towns in the UK, they're using crack as well, because if they can't get heroin, they'll use crack. And together, of course, that's also a powerful combination. So crack is more dangerous, more addictive than cocaine.
Yes.
Whether it's more harmful on the heart, I'm not so sure. But I don't think either are good for the heart.
Yes. It brings up an important pharmacological point, which is that the rate of onset of the drug is such an important factor in its addictiveness, its harm. It's why dose is such an important. We often have drug discussions without dose. It's very hard to. Drug discussions require dosages because they, obviously, things like cannabis and low dose and high dose have very different receptor interactions, and it's a whole other kettle of fish. Let's move to the next one.
This is great, Evan. We're talking pharmacology. I've always been...
I love it. This is so much fun. I wish we had about 3 hours, but I could keep going on this for ages. It's so much fun. Number 4 is magic mushrooms.
Well, that's got to be down there below LSD. Yes.
So it's even safer. So I can put it on this side. I can put LSD here.
Put it there. Yeah.
So it's even safer than LSD. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, well, it's shorter acting. I think that's the main reason. That if you have a bad trip with LSD, it can run on for 10, 12 hours. if you LSD can provoke psychosis in people who've got a vulnerability, magic mushrooms, I think they're less likely to do it. They're not so powerful. They're not so long lasting. The biggest danger with magic mushrooms is you take another mushroom that isn't a magic mushroom.
Yeah.
That's the big risk. So you have to be slightly wise. Although, I mean, it's very interesting now. You've got, as I said, you've got the American states making them available. A safe supply of magic mushrooms I think, is going to become actually really the norm in many countries in the next decade. And people are going to use it to expand their mind, think differently, but also for well-being and resilience. And knowing what you're getting, knowing what the right dose is, it can be very helpful to people in many different ways, and also have medical value too, of course.
Yes. Surely mushrooms is the next drug to get center stage on just policy changes happening across the world. Of course, we're already seeing it across the US.
Yeah.
Surely it's not too long for UK, Ireland, rest of Europe to catch up on this one, because this one seems quite absurd to me, that it's not possible to get, as you say, regulated, controlled, dosed mushrooms, psilocybin concentrations in licensed, regulated shops.
It is silly, isn't it? Yeah, I quite agree. And I mean, historically, mushrooms are a victim of politics. They were a victim of the Tory party and David Cameron trying to get traction over Labour, of Tony Blair's Labour Party, by criticising Labour for not stopping the sale of magic mushrooms in head shops. Mushrooms were legal to 2004. Cameron, who supposedly was a reformer, ended up just doing what the Daily Mail told him and castigating Labour for allowing mushrooms in Camden Market. And he came in and broke the law by banning them without consulting with the ACMD. And yeah, we would hope it would be rectified soon. But Evan, I've watched, must be 7 Home Secretaries now in the last 20 years, and they get worse and worse. It's almost like, they vie with each other to become more hostile to rational drug policy. So you're quite right. It should be rational. Actually, maybe Ireland could move faster. I mean, it would. Why not?
Fingers crossed. I mean, it'd be harder to move slower.
That is true.
Let's next one. 2 is fentanyl. Good old fentanyl.
Well, it's young fentanyl. Put it to the top, because that's the problem with fentanyl. Well, yes and no. Good old, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting. I don't know if you made that comment knowing how old a drug it is. You might have done. I mean, this drug was invented in the 1950s, and it was developed as an alternative to opiates. It's a synthetic painkiller. It was designed to essentially allow people to have access to morphine and heroin if they couldn't grow poppies. And it actually became quite a useful drug, particularly in surgery, for pain control in surgery, for decades. And it wouldn't have been a problem. There wouldn't have been abuse and all the problems we have with fentanyl today if we hadn't tried to get rid of heroin. So where heroin was available, people were using heroin, and there was no need for fentanyl. But then the major clampdowns from the United Nations and then from the US government, trying to stop people using heroin, put a huge pressure on, particularly in the States, on the Mexican cartels. And when they couldn't get enough of the precursor to heroin from India, because the United Nations had clamped down on exports, they scratched their heads and they went back to the chemistry textbook and said, "Oh, here, what's this fentanyl stuff? It's been around for 40 years. It's 50 times more potent than heroin and half the price. Wow. This is a real winner, this one." And so now we have fentanyl. We have fentanyls that are legal, medicines being sold illegally. We have new fentanyls that are illegal. Some of the new super fentanyls are so potent that the people who make them can't weigh them out in safe quantities. Almost.
Oh my God.
So here's a story. That's an anecdote that is a true anecdote, because when I started working. Back when I came back from Britain in the States in 1988, I started working with a very safe opiate called buprenorphine, which is now the sort of de facto first line or treatment, maybe preferred to methadone because it's very safe. But people in the company I was working for were working on an ultimate potent, a fentanyl-like opiate. And one day they found one of the chemists collapsed on the floor. And he had been weighing out this drug called etorphine, and he sneezed, and it blown up, and he'd ingested, and he collapsed. And the reality is, etorphine is what is used to bring down elephants and rhino. But you always got to have another person with you in case you accidentally prick yourself, because it's so potent. So basically, these super strong opiates were, it was best if they were kept secret and, didn't get in the black market. Now they're in the black market. More Americans have died from fentanyl last year than died in the whole of Vietnam War. It's a true
Horrible
nightmare. Yeah.
Yeah, it's truly tragic. We could do a whole episode on opiates themselves, but we have 5 more drugs to get through and not a lot of time. So let's try. Number 1, we have cannabis. Very, very interesting one at the moment. And I think we could again talk for an hour on. What are your thoughts on cannabis in terms of the harms list?
I put it down at C. And this, I guess, is cannabis. It's normal, traditional cannabis, 5%, 6% THC, 6% CBD, cannabidiol. Yes, a sort of old-fashioned, not skunk cannabis. Yes.
So, what would you say? Let's try parse this apart a little bit for nuance in terms of THC, because you're right that like 6% THC cannabis is just a different drug to what you'll get in the streets of Bangkok with 35%, right? Yes. I spent 2 months of last year in Southeast Asia, and it's wild what you'll get over there. And it's just a different drug when it has 30% more percent THC. So if you take, where would even like a 30% THC, would you put that up into B? Would that even go up into A?
I would put it up into B, because you can't, and it wouldn't. Very, very few people die of cannabis, even if you do take. So you might think you're dying, but you're not. So I would put that up to B. Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, cannabis is a classic example where if you have an educated market and you have shops which are run by people that know what they're doing, and you can choose what to use, you can generally get what you want without poisoning yourself. But of course,
yes.
If you just go in and, that was a big problem when they freed up the recreational market in Colorado. Companies were selling gummies with 100 milligrams of THC in. No one has a clue what. Most people don't know what 100 milligrams is. Oh, that's a little bit, isn't it? So the lack of pharmacological knowledge of people led to some serious problems, and thankfully, that's under control. So a regulated cannabis market, cannabis is pretty safe if it's a regulated market. In an unregulated market like we have today, cannabis is considerably more harmful, particularly for people who've got mental health problems.
Yes. Yeah, well said. We talked a lot in our first episode, which if people haven't seen, they should watch after this. We go into a really sad case, Billy Caldwell, and how cannabis basically saved his life and has saved so many other people's lives, but the UK government were just not remotely quick enough on making those calls quick enough, those policy changes, even when the evidence was there, and likely children died because of it. We went into all of that detail in the first episode, which I thought was super interesting, but tragic, and breaks your whole idea of what politicians are for.
Point
2, tobacco.
So tobacco, I think tobacco would have to go to B.
Tobacco is in B. Interesting. Yeah.
So what
are the harms?
Tobacco. Yeah. You're smoking nicotine. You're getting nicotine and other stuff in the tobacco. You're getting addicted. Half of all smokers die of tobacco-related disorder. It's still the leading killer of all drugs in the UK today, and the same would be true in Ireland.
Half of all smokers die of tobacco-related disease. That is a crazy statistic. I haven't heard that before.
Yep, and they die of lung cancer, and they die of heart disease, and they die of chronic bronchitis and emphysema. Those are the 3 main killers. Yeah, but it also contributes to other cancers like cancer of the breast and cancer of the bladder, etc. So it's traditional burnt tobacco is the leading cause of drug death in the world. 7 million deaths a year, twice that of alcohol.
Wow. Yeah. Let's do alcohol next.
Right. So are you going to wiggle it up there? So I think alcohol would have to go up to. I think I'm going to put it alongside tobacco as well. So currently, it's, as I said, it's second biggest. Here's another statistic you probably don't know, but this is quite chilling. So, apart from tobacco, alcohol globally kills twice as many people as all other drugs put together. But of course, that's because it's legal, and you know the legality and it's marketed, and that combination is, and the fact it is a desirable drug encourages use. So alcohol isn't intrinsically as toxic as the drugs in S and A, but this widespread use and the fact that about 15% of people who use it become dependent on it, that actually is the reason why so many people are harmed. And I'll just give a little plug in here. It's there are alternatives now. In the same way as there are alternatives to burnt tobacco, like vaping, there are alternatives to alcohol, which is what we're working on. And it would the most efficient way of actually reducing deaths in the world would probably be to encourage the use of safer alternatives to those two drugs, tobacco and alcohol.
Talk about because I only found out about your alcohol-free alcohol, which is a great marketing slogan, a couple of weeks ago, and we didn't get to talk about it in our last episode. So talk about what the hell is alcohol-free alcohol? Is it possible to have all the up and none of the down?
You can get all the up, but you can get for most people you can get enough of the up to satisfy their need. I mean, the majority of people who drink alcohol, they drink socially for relaxation. About 15% get into trouble, and the reason for that is that alcohol has multiple effects in the brain, and the more you drink, the more effects it has. But we've been working on herbal alternatives which can give you the impact of, say, a single half a pint of beer, half a glass of wine, to relax you, but not to do more. Even if you drink a whole bottle, you won't begin to engage those other transmitters like dopamine and glutamate, which lead to the problems of alcohol. We've done that. We've shown that it works. And what we would like would be for governments and regulators to say, yeah, that's great. Let's have policy to encourage that. Let's try to reduce the health harms from alcohol by at least giving the alternatives equal access, equal level playing field. Well, we haven't achieved that yet, but maybe your program will have enough influence. It's a rational use of science. There's nothing sort of magic about what we're doing. We are just applying science. But as you've intimated already, that science doesn't underpin the drug laws.
Yes.
So we need to keep banging that drum.
Can you buy? Is it possible to buy this now, or is it still in production?
Yes, it is. It is possible to buy. It's called Sentia. There are 3 spirits out there that you can use with different mixers. Yes, it's being sold in Europe. We've now got a distributor in Rotterdam, so it can go to Ireland if you want. And of great interest is we're actually launching the beer. We've got it's called GABA because we target the GABA system. The GABA system is the brain chemical that calms you down, relaxes you. What alcohol targets in its smaller, in the first dose. So we're targeting it. We call it GABA, and we're actually selling a beer called GABA. So we've taken really nice beers and removed the alcohol through a process called centrifugation. And we do this with a beer company that makes very nice alcohol-free beers called Wiper and True. They're a Bristol-based company where I live. And then we put into the alcohol-free ale or the stout or the lager, we put in the core extracts of Sentia. We don't put in all the other flavorings. We just put in the bit that gives you the buzz, and we not only get the effect of a small amount of alcohol in the low alcohol beer, but we also improve the mouth flavor. And Evan, I'm going to tell you, we're a big threat to Guinness now, because we think that our functional alcohol-free stout is better than Guinness Zero. So there you go.
Oh.
You heard it here.
All right, let's get to two more very quickly. I wish we could spend more time on these. Ketamine, really, really interesting one. What are your thoughts on ketamine?
Yeah, I put ketamine up there alongside alcohol and tobacco.
Interesting. Okay. So it's in the B tier.
Yeah, I mean, why? That's medicine. Obviously, it's it's perfectly safe when used as a medicine, but it's somewhat more addictive than the drugs below it, but the MDMA and certainly the mushrooms. So recreationally, it certainly doesn't kill as many people as drugs like tobacco and alcohol, but it does produce, for people who get very dependent on it, a very severe damage to the bladder.
Yes.
And they're called people get the cramps in the bladder, the K cramps. And people do become very dependent, and they often end up using grams a day, which bankrupts them, but also leads to the bladder maybe having to be removed. And that actually then does shorten life expectancy. So for its addictiveness, really, its slightly unpredictable effect, I put ketamine up there in B.
Got it. But less harmful than alcohol and tobacco. I'm putting that at the end of the B tier.
Oh, yes. In terms of the population damage, much less.
Yes.
But I think if ketamine was sold like alcohol, it's an interesting thought experiment. I suspect it would be possibly more harmful than alcohol, yes.
Yes. Last one is heroin. I think I can probably place this one myself.
Yeah, well, you can put that up. Yeah, I mean, so it would depend, to be honest. I think smoked heroin is probably no worse than cocaine in terms of
interesting
but injected heroin is definitely worse. So you've got to make your mind up here, Evan. And maybe and we do, we're one of the great social experiments and we're very successful in this now, has been getting heroin users to move away from injecting to smoking, and that's reduced both the spread of bloodborne infections, hepatitis, and of course in the beginning it was AIDS. But also you don't die. You generally can't smoke enough to die, and if you do stop breathing because you're smoking it, you fall over, and so you can't smoke anymore. So recovery rate. So if you actually, this is just a straight call out to anyone who's listening: never inject any drug. Never inject an opiate. Even if you know it's heroin, it might be fentanyl, which is even more dangerous. So never inject. And if you're going to use an opiate, then do try to just inhale it.
Absolutely. David, this was so much fun. I always need more time with you. I thought that was really valuable and really entertaining. And I had a different idea of one or two. I obviously mostly am quite familiar with your views and your books because I've read them and I'm a huge fan. I think that there is just not enough conversations about drug harms, and I think you're doing such amazing work. I'll leave all of the drug harms research website, all of it below. Any studies that you're currently engaged in, the alcohol-free alcohol, all the links down below. It's always such a pleasure. I really, really thought that was an entertaining episode. I know you have to run, so thank you so much for your time as always, David. I really, really appreciate it.
Great. As always, lovely to talk. Thanks for bringing pharmacology to the masses.
I love it. Always such a good time with David Nutt. I absolutely love him. I think he's a legend. If you haven't seen our first episode, we dive into a lot more of the politics and corruption around drug policies. It was a really engaging conversation, so I would check that out next. If you have seen that, then maybe go to Dr. Joanna Moncrief. We talk about a different class of drugs that could be equally or even more harmful and having a huge impact on the world, but it's just not discussed as much. Those are SSRIs. So check out that conversation. Let me know how it goes. Subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for your support. I really, really appreciate it.